Picture the vibrant, sweeping pages of a classic graphic novel. Salty sea winds, thundering cannons, fierce loyalties, and an ultimate, crushing betrayal right on the shimmering waters of the Malabar coast. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're jumping straight into a tale of absolute mythic proportions, the Epic of the Marakkars.
It begs a pretty haunting question. What happens when a legendary naval fleet, one that literally held the line against an expanding global empire, is betrayed by the very king they swore to protect? That single question is the dark heart of our story. To really grasp the tragedy of this broken alliance, we first need to understand who these titans of the sea actually were.
Okay, let's dive into this. The name Marakkar wasn't just a label. It was a deeply revered, inherited mantle of power. It meant you were the supreme admiral of the fleet for the King Samuthiri, better known to history as the Zamorin of Calicut, over in present-day Kerala. From 1520 to 1600, 4 legendary Marakkars stepped up. They are historically credited with organizing the very first naval defense of the Indian coastline against Portuguese invasion.
Chapter 1. Rise of the Marakkars.
Now you might be wondering, were they always warriors? Actually, no. They started off as a branch of Arab merchants who had settled down in Kochi. They were businessmen, trading and even collaborating with the Portuguese at first. But things went south. According to the 16th century writer Zainuddin Makdum II, the Portuguese started bypassing their local trade routes. They cut off the Marakkars' lifeblood by buying directly from the locals. And, well, that sparked a fire. The peaceful merchants had no choice but to draw their swords.
Chapter 2. War against the Portuguese.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of their retaliation. Admiral Kudi Ahmed Ali unleashed a completely relentless campaign. In 1524, the Navy helped the Ceylonese king actively reduce the Colombo fort to expel the Portuguese. The very next year, bam, Kudi Ahmed Ali's fleet bombarded the new Portuguese fortress in Calicut. Then they sailed straight into Cochin, torched a bunch of Portuguese vessels, and made it back safely. By 1529, they secured a massive victory at the Battle of Chetwai River. Just a rapid-fire sequence of explosive strikes.
Chapter 3. The Fearsome Duo.
This part sounds straight out of an adventure saga, but it is deeply grounded in history. Kunjali Marakkar IV rescued a young Chinese boy named Chinali from a Portuguese slave ship. Kunjali grew incredibly fond of the boy. Over time, Chinali actually embraced his rescuer's faith and became his absolute most trusted and fiercely feared lieutenant. Bound by this intense shared enmity, together they became an unstoppable, terrifying force.
Just listen to how terrified their enemies were. Diogo do Couto, a Portuguese historian who was actually right there when Kunjali eventually surrendered, wrote that Chinali was, quote, the greatest exponent of the Moor superstition and enemy of the Christians in all Malabar. He noted how this rescued boy was trusted with absolutely everything. The fear this duo commanded was just palpable.
Now, what's really interesting here is how that fear warped reality. Enemies like Couto painted Chinali as a literal monster, claiming he invented these exquisite kinds of torture for captives taken at sea. It paints a totally gruesome picture. But, historically speaking, there are 0 other sources to corroborate those tales. Modern historians largely dismiss them as ridiculous wartime propaganda, a desperate attempt to demonize a truly terrifying opponent.
Chapter 4. The Zamorins' Betrayal.
Because the real downfall didn't come from the Portuguese. It came from within. As Kunjali IV grew more powerful, he developed some extremely dangerous hubris. He started openly challenging his own king. In a move of staggering audacity, he literally cut off the tail of the Zamorin's own elephant. And when the Zamorin sent a noble and his wife to get an explanation, Kunjali assaulted them. Pushed to the absolute brink by his admiral's defiance, the Zamorin made the unthinkable choice. He allied with his sworn enemy, Portuguese commander André Furtado de Mendoza, to take Kunjali down.
Let's see how this builds to the climax. The retaliation was swift but chaotic. A botched first strike by the newly allied forces was a total disaster due to terrible communication. But they regrouped. They unleashed a crushing, coordinated pincer assault. Cannons roaring from the sea as the Portuguese attacked the fortress, while the Zamorin's army bore down from the land. The Marakkars were completely trapped.
Outnumbered and outgunned, Kunjali Marakkar surrendered. But he surrendered to his king, the Zamorin, under a solemn promise of pardon. And here is the tragic twist. The promise was a lie. The absolute second Kunjali surrendered, the Zamorin betrayed him
handing his greatest admiral directly over to the Portuguese. It's an incredibly heavy end to a lifetime of defending the coast.
Chapter 5: Legacy of the Harbors. But their impact certainly didn't die with them. The Marakkars left behind an absolute masterclass in coastal defense. From 4 key harbors, Mutingal, Vadakara, Chembol, and Kanyarm-Kotu, they orchestrated their operations. The genius was in their unique design. They heavily fortified them only from the sea. Their backs were left wide open to the land of the Zamorin. French traveler Pirot even called their goods registration system most admirable. But that unique open-back defense was a massive testament to trust, the very trust that eventually undid them. And defensively, these ports worked spectacularly well. The Portuguese made multiple desperate attempts to conquer them from the ocean and failed every single time. Their assaults just shattered against those impenetrable stone walls, resulting in immense losses, especially at the stronghold of Vadakara. It was like a ghost fleet of engineering, repelling the empire long after the admirals were gone.
And that pioneering spirit vastly outlived the 16th century betrayal. Centuries later, on July 11, 1954, the modern Indian Navy officially commissioned the INS Kunjali. With Captain Michael Benjamin Samuel as its first commanding officer, the legacy of the Marakkars was immortalized, a resolute, lasting tribute to the very first organized naval defense of the Indian coast.
Which brings us to our final thought. We've seen unmatched bravery, brilliant strategy, and a legendary brotherhood capable of holding back an entire empire. Yet it was pride and a broken alliance that brought the fortress down. So, looking at the epic saga of the Marakkars, we are left to ponder. What is the true cost of internal division when standing up to an expanding empire? It's a tragic, powerful lesson from history. Thank you for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep digging into the past.